On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program editor-in-chief of The Contributor, Tina Dupuy. Hello, Tina.
Hi, Sam. How are you?
I am doing great. Now, do we have that right? It's editor-in-chief, right? Not editor-and-chief.
Editor-in-chief, yeah.
Okay. And you guys are launching, is that right? I mean, you've been in beta, but you guys are you full-blown launch now?
We are full-blown launch as of this week.
All right, we got a link.
Well,
First off, it's relevant to your piece, actually, what The Contributor is. But tell us what The Contributor is.
The Contributor is a new news network. We basically have about 100. Currently, we have about 150 blogs, news sites that we pull from. Plus a couple of original columnists and freelance writers. And we're doing this kind of, little publicity stunt called paying writers.
Weird.
Yeah. And, we're kind of on the forefront of this technology. Going to get a patent on it, stuff like that. But, we're kind of radical in our approach to these people called content providers, and with a focus on news as opposed to side boob and like whatever Miley Cyrus is doing this second.
Yeah, I'm confused. I'm at thecontributor.com right now. You got a story on the top about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and fracking, and then you've got a story about the Obamacare premiums. Look good, but Medicare for All would be better. Cory Booker's Tall Tales, catching up to his disappointing record of reform. All great stories. But here's the awkward part. When I look to the right, I see these sub-columns: civil rights and environment, international, guns in America, education, healthcare, and where's the stuff about the celebrity, like what somebody got, nobody's got divorced, or what happened?
Right, we're taking this gamble that we don't actually need our news subsidized by side boob. That there are studies that pollsters talk to human beings, Americans even, about what they want out of news, and by and large, the majority of them will say that they want more information and less fluff. That they're tired of the recap of what happened on Dancing with the Stars. And what they really want is actual information, and they want it in a concise fashion and in a candid fashion. And there appears to be a gap in the market. So that's what we're trying to fill.
It's interesting because I think to a certain extent, I don't know. I mean, it's very hard from my tiny sequestered bubble to get a sense of trends like this, but certainly like Al Jazeera America, for instance, seems to be sort of marketing in the same way. I mean, there at least is a sense that there is. I mean, all joking aside, a real hole in the market for news that doesn't involve. Don't go skinny dipping in New Jersey. Harry Potter star shoots down major rumor. America's Diet Report Card. I've seen girls pull out their own teeth to look skinnier. I'm just going on what the...
Yeah, exactly. But, a lot of the times, like when you watch Bill O'Reilly, they'll have things like, I'm disgusted by all of this sex, and then that will give them an opportunity to show women in bikinis for an entire segment, right? And I think that there is room to be, not puritanical about sex and not, and be sex positive, but like there is a time and a place for that, and there's also news, and this stuff is really important. But like the kind of link baiting that we're subjected to, and the like kind of tawdry celebrity meltdowns and like flame wars between people who I don't care about. I don't care what their opinion is about anything because I don't know who they are and shouldn't care who they are. That kind of stuff. And policymakers and people with actual power are not being paid attention to, and we're not kind of watching that. We're not watching what's going on in our own communities. We're not watching. We've seen what happens when we don't watch what goes on in our own state houses. That kind of stuff goes kind of unwatched, and because we're spending all our time worrying about, whatever celebrity is having, a mental breakdown. So that I believe, and this is my gamble with the site, is that there really is a demand for that kind of information. And so, we've been really fortunate. We've had a really good summer. We've been on the front page of Reddit a couple of times. We're getting a really good response. And so we're just going to continue with this. I know you were the first person, and we cut a check too. We use your content all the time. It's fantastic. And we're really excited. The piece, the editorial that you mentioned, was just my story about I came into this world as a stand-up comic, and I failed into journalism a couple of years ago, and into a marketplace that was just a disaster because suddenly instead of getting a paycheck, journalists were being expected to just for exposure do the same thing that used to actually give them money. So my counterpart 20 years ago, had apparently health benefits and a retirement plan, and this thing called money in their bank account, like every other week, I guess, was a regular thing, and and that just that has dissipated. And when we talk about this kind of like local war movement, and everyone wants to know who cultivated their local kale, people don't know where their news comes from. And oftentimes, if you don't pay journalists, then special interests will pay writers to do the same thing. And so we get our information from like bizarre sources. And it also, and I'm sure you've covered this, the paid internship kind of movement. If you only the well-off can afford not to work.
Right.
So it kind of boils off the diversity of the newsroom. And if you don't have journalists who are making a living, or if journalism doesn't make you a living, then people won't, it's only people who have money who will do it, and everyone else has to go somewhere else.
I mean, both those points are really great points. I mean, one is that we already have a problem where our mainstream media is so out of touch. I mean, even and obviously, I through my own myopia, I see this from even from left-wing commentators on the mainstream news and cable news. These are people whose perspective is so limited from a socioeconomic sense that they can't even imagine what is problematic about cutting things like Social Security, the concept of what Americans are going through on a daily basis in terms of unemployment and in terms of paying their bills. I mean, there's such an obliviousness, and you make a great point that we hear a lot about diversity in terms of race and gender, but we hear very little conversation about diversity in the newsrooms, about socioeconomic class, and you're right. I mean, if journalism becomes one of two things, one, it either becomes sort of a hobby for those who can afford it, and when we talk about the national media, we're talking about having to live in a metropolitan area that is incredibly expensive. And the other being, we are seeing increasingly media being subsidized by big money that invariably has a bias towards big money. And that's one of the things that I've struggled with this show is, there's been, I'm not beating people away from the door on a daily basis, but there has been opportunities that on first blush look good in terms of getting funding for this show, but it comes with, and perhaps I'm overly sensitive to it, I'm always concerned that it comes with strings that may not be so clear at the beginning, but may come in the form down the road of like, why are you doing this? Why are you harping on this aspect so much? And I just don't feel comfortable getting into that type of position. The flip side of it is that we spend, more time than I want counting nickels and, having to, plead on a daily basis for more member support. But really, this is the way that the media is going. And so, and I will say that your outlet, I'm not putting braces on my daughter from what we're getting from the contributor, but it's something that says, we value the work you're doing, and hopefully it brings some eyeballs to your site. How do you guys, is it a straight advertising model for you guys?
It's an advertising and sponsor model, exactly. And the thing about sharing content, sharing money with our content providers is not that we're going to put your child through college. But the fact of the matter is that content has value for advertisers. It has value for the site owner. It should therefore also be valuable to the people who create it. It's more of like a tip than anything else, but it's a valuable commodity, but to everyone else except for the person who actually made it. And that's been something that started with this thing called the internet, and the blogging. And it is something that we've just kind of accepted as a thing, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can take a stand, and it is not okay. This thing has value, content has value, and people should be paid for what they do, especially when it's something that is quality. I mean, you add a lot to our site. Having your content there adds a lot to our site. And so, of course we should, share the revenue that we are making off of your content. I mean, it just, to me, it's ethically something that we should do. And we're, like I said, we're not gonna solve any problems, but it's definitely, putting, our money where our mouths are.
And we've seen, Ariana Huffington knows that this content has quality. They sold the Huffington Post for hundreds of millions of dollars, based on, and to their credit, the Huffington Post has got some very good reporters, and they
do.
They will also generate some very important reported pieces, but largely the Huffington Post generated its value from not paying people. I mean, it provided some form of compensation. I mean, this is sort of the dilemma, right? Is that when you're coming up, the idea of exposure is worth something to you as a writer, particularly in this sort of era when it is all about personal branding in some fashion. But at one point, the worm turns, and at one point you need to get paid.
Right. Well, and you really, made this point earlier. When I watch a lot of cable news and and listen to the radio, and you can just tell that there is nobody who has ever struggled to feed themselves. There is nobody who has ever struggled, worked more than one job, had their bills turned pink, been evicted, had their car breakdown and just had to leave it wherever it was because they had that kind of broke. Have never had that kind of adversity in their lives because they're very flippant about these kind of abstract numbers about our, people in this country. When they talk about food stamps, it's well, if we cut off food stamps, they're just going to have to get a job. And it's okay, that's clearly you've never been hungry. that's something that comes from somebody of privilege. They've never, ever struggled. And, and it's quite obvious when you, in our media culture today, that a lot of the people are the media elite. They are, what we refer to at Crooks and Liars. I know you're having Nicole Bell on after me, as the villagers. They're like, they've been all to the same schools. They all know each other. They kind of all have this kind of same think. They all have the same values. And they really have never, by and large, most of them have never struggled economically.
And I think even
so they kind of have this, like, they're out of touch, completely tone deaf to this kind of these economic issues.
And I think almost even and as equally distressing, if not more so, is that their experience of even I mean, for the most part, I have not had to deal with those type of issues in my life. I mean, there's been times where I've been out of work, and it's, but I've never had that level of drama, and I think to a certain extent, just my interactions via email or by the phone with my audience, I think has, at the very least, makes me aware of what people are going through. And that is, I think, the thing that is really genuinely missing from these people. They, short of occasionally being, taking a rickshaw or talking to their cab driver or to their driver, the exposure that these people have is incredibly limited. I mean, that's been my experience in conversations with people in a green room, from people who you would imagine know better or should know better, is that they are just fundamentally out of touch. I mean, that I don't know that you need to have experienced these things necessarily firsthand, but it's good to know people who have, and good to be aware that this is ongoing before you sit down and begin to espouse an opinion about how easily these things are overcome. And I think that's really what occurs to me is really genuinely problematic.
No, I totally agree that you can absolutely be empathetic towards somebody else's economic circumstances, and you don't have to have personally gone through it. But I think that, like, when you have a colleague who grew up on food stamps and kind of pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, instead of just a bunch of other people who are like you because they were well off and then therefore able to get an internship and therefore able to get the job in the newsroom where you are. I think, and so then there's nobody to kind of challenge those beliefs to say, like, hey, that's actually not how that works. That's what I think is more important, and that's something that we just don't focus on. When we have a certain class of people reporting, telling the stories really,
yep.
of America, when there's a lot more to that. I mean, there are 46 million Americans who are living in poverty. There are 35 million Canadians in this world. We have 46 million Americans living in poverty. Why don't we hear those stories? Why aren't we sick of hearing those stories? And we're not. We're too busy. How is it pronounced? Nicki Minaj, or whatever. You know what I mean? There's so many. That should be horribly embarrassing to us as a nation. And it's like this kind of buried lead of how we let our citizenry live, and then to have Congress kind of brazenly cut food stamps or vote to cut food stamps in a time when people are truly struggling. It's gobsmacking. But
this is a problem that's going to. I mean, this is a problem that is only going to grow. I mean, in terms of this lack of economic diversity in the newsroom is bound to grow. I mean, you've got $1 trillion worth of student debt out there. You're going to college. The rationality of, or I should say, the decision that you've got to make is to exit college with a tremendous amount of loans to go into a profession that is basically paying you with exposure. And if you hit the lottery, then maybe it will pay off. But if you don't, if you're just reporting, you're not becoming you're not being able to, you're not going to build your brand sufficiently, then you've made a dire mistake. I mean, I think I saw Sarah Jaffe tweeting just the other day that, like, she's got invoices that are extant over 90 days from media outlets, and she can't pay her bills. At one point, people are going to start saying, like, I am driven to enter this profession, but I just cannot do it. And that's presuming, of course, they even have that option is even on the table. They may have to be taken care of a sick one, or they may have a family. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. It's a real big problem. Do you see? I mean, what is the answer here, or is there an answer?
The answer is that journalism has to pay. I mean, that's the only solution that I can come up with. That if this is a profession that traditionally has paid the bills, we are not all George Will. We do not all make north of six figures, but it traditionally is something that has paid the bills. Interns need to be paid. Content providers need to be paid, and then it is something that is less risky. So people who come from different socioeconomic parts of the country, experiences, can become journalists, can become storytellers, and be able to make a living doing that. Otherwise, it's way too risky. If you have student loans, if you have anything, you're going to have to go to something that has, more stability. And right now we just don't have that. I think we need to start the conversation, and that's what I'm trying to do now, because and I had a hard time getting this editorial that you mentioned. It's on thecontributor.com if you guys want to go see it. I had a really hard time getting it published because, and I'm
you do a column that gets distributed in 200
right. I
papers
about 90
across the
newspapers, right? But and the LA Times actually wrote me back and said, look, it's too navel gazing. They didn't want it, they didn't want to even talk about this kind of issue.
What they really meant is our navel's very ugly.
But exactly, it was really something that's horribly embarrassing to journalists, and they don't actually want to talk about it. I mean, and I didn't realize how visceral that was. But the truth of the matter is, this is a profession that's gone through some real tough times. I talk about it in the piece. In 2007, we lost 15,000 newspaper jobs. In 2008, it was another 16,000. That's 30,000 in 2 years. That was that's a buried lead. It was just a bloodletting. And all those journalists who lost their jobs, they went into a profession where suddenly there was no money. It was just for exposure, So what they basically had been doing their entire lives as a job became a hobby all of a sudden. So, it's been going through some very weird transitions, and we can get into the weeds of media ownership and all of that. But the bottom line is, if we want quality journalism, it has to start with paying journalists a living wage. Labor doesn't see journalists as labor, but it absolutely is, and it's if we want our stories to be told, if we want to be informed, we have to have the people who are responsible for that information. We have to make sure that they are able to pay their light bill.
Tina Dupuy, Tina Dupuy, editor-in-chief of The Contributor. Go to thecontributor.com. It is thecontributor.com. Of course, we will have a link on the homepage of majority.fm. Thecontributor.com. It's great stuff. It is one of my daily, as I cycle through sites, it's one of my daily go-tos. I really appreciate you coming on, Tina.
You're great stuff, Sam.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Talk to you soon.